The sound of wine glasses toasting echoed like a warning bell. I lingered there, like a shadow in a formal suit, with my stunning but shallow error draped over my arm. This event was meant to be my triumph, a bold statement that I'd progressed, that I was flourishing. But then I spotted her, my former spouse, Sophia. She wasn't merely getting by without me. She was radiant. And when she tilted forward to kiss the gentleman next to her, the magnate whose reputation was spoken of with reverence across the venue, my whole existence, the one I'd meticulously built on deceptions and remorse, crumbled into countless fragments. The formal attire seemed less like clothing and more like a disguise, a custom-fitted restraint of dark fabric. Michael straightened his satin necktie for what felt like the 11th time, his image in the luxury apartment's glass pane a warped symbol of achievement. Beneath, the metropolis extended like a tapestry of twinkling gems. Each glow represented an existence he felt utterly detached from. This was his reality now, the barren opulence, the sweeping vistas, the inescapable void that no level of accomplishment could satisfy. Cease adjusting it. You'll crease your outfit. A tone like sweetened venom cooed from behind. Isabella. She appeared from the sleeping quarters, a sight in sapphire silk that hugged her enhanced contours. By every measure, she was impeccable. Her golden locks were arranged in casual curls. Her cosmetics were flawless, and her grin was a tool she deployed with expert precision. She was the ideal adornment for a gentleman of his standing, a gorgeous, straightforward diversion. And this evening at the yearly Harrington Enterprises banquet, she was intended to be his gleaming prize. You appear exquisite, Michael uttered, the praise feeling like dust on his tongue. I realize, she responded, twirling before the reflective surface. This gown was exorbitant. It's crucial to create a strong impact tonight. Isn't Mr. Harrington attending? He's the organizer, Isabella. Naturally, he'll be present. Michael exhaled, shifting from the pain. The idea of confronting his co-workers, the executives, and the mysterious leader, Victor Harrington, with Isabella beside him, instilled a recognizable unease he couldn't fully identify. It seemed like disloyalty, though he found it hard to pinpoint who was being betrayed. It had been 2 years since the separation, 2 years since he'd last encountered Sophia. He convinced himself he'd advanced, that this existence with Isabella was his desire. He possessed the demanding position, the lavish residence, the attractive partner. He had succeeded. Yet on certain evenings, in the profound stillness amid Isabella's superficial respirations, he would remain alert and recall a contrasting existence. An existence brimming with unforced mirth, with dialogues that delved beyond rumors and material desires, with an affection that resembled less a bargain and more a return to comfort. He recollected the initial periods with Sophia in their compact, cluttered dwelling that perpetually carried the aroma of her sketching materials and overcooked bread. He recalled her tresses bundled in a disheveled knot, a streak of azure pigment on her face, her gaze illuminated with an enthusiasm he hadn't witnessed in others since. She was an idealist, a creator who perceived splendor in the fissures of sidewalks and verse in the ordinary. He had been an aspiring entry-level manager then, brimming with drive and an urgent need to validate himself. She had trusted in him, had served as his stabilizer in the turbulent waters of his personal doubts. "Don't you believe this bracelet is excessive?" Isabella inquired, displaying a sparkling extravagance that shone harshly under the embedded illumination. "Or is it precisely suitable?" "It's ideal," Michael stated, his tone empty. He considered the modest gold pendant he had presented to Sophia for their initial commemoration. It contained a small, ineptly drawn image of them, their beams broad and authentic. She had never removed it. His rise within the organization had been rapid, but it demanded sacrifices. The extended shifts spilled into leisure days. The professional journeys grew more common, and the individual who returned to Sophia was a husk of the one she had wed. He grew skeptical, merciless, fixated on the subsequent advancement, the next agreement. He had exchanged their mutual aspirations for equity shares and executive suites. He had assured himself he was pursuing it for their benefit, for their tomorrow. But at some point, their tomorrow had transformed into his pursuit. The disputes commenced gradually, then intensified into acrimonious battles of endurance. She charged him with being distant, with forfeiting his essence. He labeled her innocent, claimed she failed to grasp the strains he endured. He began viewing her creativity, her zeal, as a trivial pastime instead of the core of her being. The ultimate strike had been his infidelity. It hadn't involved Isabella, but a coworker, a pointless, sordid encounter stemming from vanity and liquor. When Sophia discovered it, she didn't yell or hurl objects. Her quietude was far more severe. The expression in her gaze was not fury, but deep disillusionment, as though she was at last perceiving him as the vacant individual he had evolved into. The separation had been rapid and orderly. She desired neither the residence, the funds, nor the existence he had established. She simply sought escape. She gathered her sketchpads, her colors, and the gold pendant, and departed his life without glancing back. He hadn't encountered or communicated with her since. He had convinced himself it was optimal, that he was liberated. He had discovered Isabella, a lady who integrated smoothly into his fresh existence, who revered his riches and position without challenging the person he had become to attain it. Prepared to depart? Isabella questioned, jolting him from his contemplation. She linked her limb through his, her contact sensing chilly and alien. Let's proceed to demonstrate to them who the genuine influential duo is. Michael compelled a grin, the tissues in his countenance resisting. As they progressed toward the exit, he glimpsed his image again. The figure gazing back was an outsider, a parody of prosperity. He was residing in an ornate confinement of his own creation. And this evening, he was on the verge of displaying his jailer at the most prominent social gathering of the season. An abrupt, icy foreboding enveloped him. A sensation that this evening would alter all. He simply didn't comprehend how accurate he was. The Harrington Plaza was a structural wonder, a spike of black stone and crystal that punctured the skies. The banquet was occurring in the majestic hall on the 90th level, an area crafted to awe and overwhelm equally. As Michael and Isabella emerged from the exclusive lift, they encountered a surge of perceptual excess. The atmosphere was dense with the fragrance of costly scents and rare blossoms. The audio was a harmony of subdued discussions, tinkling vessels, and the sorrowful notes of a chamber ensemble performing in an unobtrusive nook. The hall was a chamber of reflections, both actually and metaphorically. The barriers were adorned with ground-to-roof mirrors, mirroring the sparkling gathering into an endless, brilliant illusion. It was a space filled with individuals who, like him, were refined replicas of their authentic selves. Michael observed his associates, their countenances extended into rehearsed beams, their sights perpetually surveying the area for someone of greater significance to converse with. He noticed his competitors, their greetings solid, but their stares frigid. This was his domain, the arena where professions were forged and shattered over appetizers and bubbly. "Oh, Mike, it's magnificent," Isabella murmured, her sights expanded with greedy delight. She was in her domain, a hunter in a wilderness of affluence and sway. She strengthened her hold on his limb, her crimson claws pressing lightly into the material of his attire. "There's Mr. Reynolds from accounting. I learned his spouse recently acquired a fresh appearance. Let's greet him." Before Michael could object, she was dragging him into the midst. He affixed his professional beam and maneuvered the perilous communal flows. He traded courtesies with individuals he loathed, chuckled at humor that lacked wit, and received praises on his charming escort with a sickening feeling of pretense. Isabella was adept, smoothly enchanting and neutralizing, gathering scandals and accolades like valuable stones. She was an embodiment of his triumph, and for that, people cherished her. But as he observed her compliment a thinning manager, he experienced a deep feeling of solitude, a seclusion so thorough it was nearly tangible. He recalled banquets with Sophia. She had detested these occasions, had termed them vanity displays, but she had always attended for him. She would remain silently by his side, a haven of tranquility in the swirling disorder. While he networked, she would watch, her creator's vision detecting the delicate subtleties of interpersonal exchanges, the spark of urgency in a novice employee's gaze, the phony courage of a faltering supervisor. Later, she would narrate it all to him with a wry, tender wit that rendered the entire pretense tolerable. She had been his foundation, his sanity check. Without her, he was merely another replica in the chamber of reflections, indistinguishable from the others. "Michael, my lad," a resounding voice interrupted his musings. It was David Whittaker, his immediate overseer, and a gentleman whose cheerful manner concealed a predator's senses. "Delightful to encounter you. And you must be Isabella. Captivating." "Mr. Whittaker, it's an honor," Isabella purred, offering her palm. "The honor is mine," David replied, his gaze lingering on her a bit too long. He shifted back to Michael, his beam tightening. "Significant evening, Michael. Gossip suggests Harrington will reveal the new director of Asian Ventures tonight. You're still the leading candidate, naturally, but rivalry is intense. The advancement. It was the purpose he was present, the reason he was tolerating this empty show. It was the peak of years of unyielding labor, of forfeited weekends and tense bonds. It was the reward he had assured himself would ultimately justify everything. "I'm assured," Michael stated, his tone more stable than he sensed. "Assurance is beneficial, but in this firm, it's all about image," David remarked, his stare sweeping over Isabella with an expression that was both admiring and belittling. "You've got to possess the appropriate resources. Create a favorable impression on the chief." He patted Michael on the back. "Don't ruin it." As David departed, Michael felt a chilly lump form in his abdomen. The appropriate resources. Was that all Isabella represented to him? An instrument for his goals. He regarded her, now involved in a lively exchange with another manager's partner, and for the initial time, he perceived the harsh truth of their bond. It was a commercial alliance, a union of expediency. He supplied the way of life, and she supplied the appearance. There was no profundity, no genuine link, just a mutual fascination with the surface. He required a beverage. Apologizing, he proceeded to the counter, weaving through groups of mingling attendees. He requested a whiskey, straight, and consumed it swiftly, the scorching fluid doing little to calm the turmoil within him. He rested against the stone counter, the cool rock a pleasing jolt to his senses. He felt like an imposter, a gentleman enacting a part he had long forgotten how to abandon. He surveyed the space once more, a self-punishing impulse urging him to absorb the complete extent of his ornate jail. The light fixtures cascaded gems like solidified droplets. The wine streamed like liquid. The merriment was loud but contained no delight. It was an impeccable, lovely, spiritless spectacle. And then he beheld her. It was merely a brief sight initially, a burst of vivid scarlet in the ocean of ebony and silver. A lady was positioned by the expansive pane, her rear to him, gazing out at the urban illuminations. There was something in her stance, a serene assurance and poise that contrasted sharply with the frenzied vigor of the space. He experienced a shock, a feeling of familiarity so potent it nearly expelled the air from him. His pulse started to pound against his chest, a wild, urgent rhythm. He assured himself it was improbable, that his thoughts were deceiving him, summoning a specter from history. Sophia wouldn't be present. This wasn't her realm. She had fled from this existence, from him. Why would she return? But as the lady pivoted slightly, her outline lit by the metropolitan glows, the respiration lodged in his throat. The refined contour of her chin, the soft arc of her throat. It was her, it was Sophia, but also not. The lady he recalled was a gentle, tender spirit who wore her emotions openly. This lady was altered. She carried herself with a composure and self-assurance he had never observed before. She was no longer the young woman with color on her face, but a lady who appeared as if she commanded the very panorama she was appreciating. Michael's veins chilled. The chamber of reflections abruptly felt like a maze, and he was adrift in its warped images, staring at a lady who was both his history and an absolute unknown. His existence, which had been balancing on a delicate base of denial, was about to collapse. Time appeared to decelerate, the din of the banquet diminishing into a muted, far-off clamor. Michael's cosmos had shrunk to one focal point, the lady in the scarlet gown. He couldn't stir, couldn't inhale. He was anchored in place, a figure of a gentleman clutching an empty whiskey tumbler. She pivoted completely then, advancing from the pane and into the illumination, and it was her, Sophia, but a rendition of her he could never have envisioned. The alterations weren't extreme, but they were significant. The unremarkable chestnut tresses he remembered were now a lush mahogany arranged in an elegant updo that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. The plain, free-spirited garments she once preferred were absent, substituted by a long scarlet robe that flowed over her form with subtle refinement. It wasn't ostentatious or exposing, but it demanded notice. It conveyed confidence, of a lady at ease in her own being, who didn't need to proclaim to be acknowledged. But the most notable shift was in her gaze. They had always been her most vivid trait, a profound, heartfelt indigo. Now they possessed a fresh glow, a perceptive, peaceful profundity. The fragility he had once known and maybe undervalued was vanished. In its stead was a serene fortitude, a self-confidence that was both enchanting and profoundly disturbing. She wasn't just enduring. She was prospering. The insight struck him not like a surge, but like a deluge, erasing the meticulously crafted story of his life after the split. He hadn't abandoned her shattered. He had liberated her. She started to traverse the assembly, and Michael observed, entranced. She maneuvered the space with a simplicity and elegance she had never owned before. Individuals turned as she went by, their talks stumbling briefly. She wasn't pursuing attention, but it was attracted to her like an insect to fire. She would provide a modest courteous beam to some, a short inclination to others. She appeared to recognize people here, to fit in a manner she never had when she was beside him. Who was she currently? What had transpired in the 2 years since she had exited his life? He had pictured her faltering, perhaps laboring in a lowly occupation to sustain her creativity, residing in a tiny, isolated dwelling. It was a harsh, self-centered illusion, he now comprehended, one that had permitted him to rationalize his own decisions. The lady in front of him had not been faltering. She had been evolving. Isabella's voice, piercing and undesired, penetrated his daze. "Mike, are you all right? You seem as if you've encountered a phantom." He recoiled, pivoting to discover her next to him, a sulk on her impeccably coated lips. "I'm okay," he replied, his tone tense. "Well, you've been gazing at that lady for several minutes. Do you recognize her?" Isabella's sights constricted, examining Sophia with a judgmental, rivalrous stare. "The gown is somewhat basic, don't you agree, and she ought to have donned more ornaments?" "I used to recognize her," Michael muttered, returning to the counter to request another whiskey. He required the sting, the diversion. "Used to recognize her? What does that imply?" Isabella urged, her inflection tinged with doubt. "It implies we collaborated ages ago," he fabricated, the phrases sensing like stones in his mouth. He couldn't disclose the reality. He couldn't declare, "That's the lady I discarded. The lady whose spirit I fractured. The lady who is now unimaginably more luminous and vital than I have ever witnessed her." His fabrication appeared to satisfy Isabella temporarily. She began a tale about a competing social figure-style blunder, but Michael wasn't attentive. His focus was entirely seized by Sophia. He observed as she was neared by Julian Pierce, the infamously merciless director of mergers. Michael prepared himself, anticipating Pierce to reject her with his typical haughtiness, but instead Pierce's countenance split into an authentic, deferential beam. He inclined in, attending closely to whatever she was expressing. They conversed for a few minutes, and as they separated, Pierce inclined with a look of honest respect. It was bizarre. This was a realm Sophia had always scorned. She had called these individuals empty figures and ornate ladies. Yet here she was, not just attending but apparently esteemed. His thoughts raced, attempting to assemble an account. Had she relinquished her creativity? Had she compromised, accepted a business role? The notion was a sour remedy. But as he observed her, he knew that wasn't the case. The lady in scarlet hadn't sacrificed herself. She had advanced. A server passed with a platter of wine stems, and Sophia accepted one. As she raised the vessel to her lips, her sights swept the space. For a pulse-halting instant, their stares connected. Michael stiffened. The whole hall, with its clamor and its brilliance, appeared to disappear. There was only the immense, soundless gulf of 2 years separating them. He perceived a spark of identification in her sights, a short indecipherable look that might have been astonishment or maybe something different altogether. It was present and then absent in a flash. She didn't beam. She didn't scowl. She merely sustained his stare for a second that extended into perpetuity, and then, with a delicate, nearly unnoticeable inclination, she averted her gaze, directing her focus to someone who had just neared her. That inclination was more crushing than any outcry or charge could have been. It was a rejection. It was courteous. It was polite, but it was a distinct and unequivocal indication that he no longer possessed any influence over her. He was a segment of her history, a section that had been perused, sealed, and stored on a forgotten ledge. The atmosphere surged back into his lungs, and he experienced a vertiginous blend of feelings, astonishment, remorse, and a peculiar, tormenting twinge of yearning. He desired to stride over, to request an explanation, to inquire how she had accomplished it, how she had become this individual. But what entitlement did he have? He was the one who had departed. He was the one who had demolished their shared existence. "Mike, are you even hearing me?" Isabella's voice was sharp with annoyance. "What?" "Yes, certainly," he faltered, diverting his sights from Sophia. "I was mentioning we should attempt to secure a moment with Mr. Harrington. This might be your sole opportunity to converse with him prior to the declaration. The advancement he had nearly overlooked. The award that had once appeared like the most vital thing in existence now sensed like a vacant, insignificant bauble. What was a directorship compared to the forfeiture he was now sensing so sharply? He had ascended to the summit of the peak only to comprehend he had abandoned his essence at the base, and he had just beheld it, traversing a crowded space in a scarlet gown more exquisite and unreachable than ever. Called by Isabella's drive, Victor Harrington entered. The subtle murmur of the banquet seemed to lower in intensity, a group inhalation as the organizer finally honored his own gathering. Harrington was not what most anticipated. He wasn't aged or showy. He was in his mid-50s with a slim, fit physique, defined traits, and sights that appeared to penetrate directly through the refined facades of all in the space. He donned a basic, perfectly customized navy suit without a necktie, an act of rebellion against the business attire standard he himself had established. He radiated an aura of serene, immovable authority. He didn't need to dominate a space. His attendance was sufficient. "There he is," Isabella whispered, her voice a blend of reverence and greed. "Go converse with him." But Michael couldn't stir because Victor Harrington was not solitary. He had entered the space and proceeded straight without pause to the lady in scarlet, to Sophia. Michael observed, his heart becoming a heavy burden in his torso as Harrington positioned a palm tenderly on the base of her spine, a motion of relaxed, deep closeness. He bent in and whispered something in her ear. And Sophia pivoted to him, her countenance erupting into a beam. It was an authentic, brilliant beam, the type Michael hadn't witnessed in years, the type he used to think was reserved solely for him. The space appeared to slant on its pivot. Sophia and Victor Harrington. It was improbable. It made no logic. How could their realms have conceivably intersected? The reserved anti-business creator and the giant of commerce. It was a merging of two entirely distinct universes. The assembly began to drift toward them, a gradual, inevitable wave of flatterers and optimists. Harrington was the star, and everyone in the space was a world eager to be ensnared in his path. But Harrington appeared unaware of them all. His concentration was wholly on Sophia. They stood united, a depiction of effortless bond, speaking in subdued pitches, seemingly in a realm of their own. "Well, I'll be astonished," Isabella exhaled, her voice a peculiar mix of shock and jealousy. "Who is she?" The fabrication about them being past co-workers now felt weak and obvious. The truth was stuck in Michael's throat, a sour, rough capsule he couldn't ingest. He felt a rush of something intense and unfamiliar. Envy. It was a primitive, raw sentiment that caught him off guard. He had no entitlement to envy. He had a gorgeous lady on his limb. He had been the one to terminate things. But witnessing Sophia with another gentleman with that gentleman felt like a bodily strike. He observed Harrington's palm on her spine, the casual manner he stood next to her, the way he regarded her as if she were the sole individual in a space of hundreds. He was beholding a version of Sophia he had never known. A lady who was not his timid, encouraging companion, but her assured equal to one of the most influential men globally. What had he overlooked? What had he been so oblivious to? He recalled her attempting to discuss her creativity with him, about a fresh exhibition she had found, about a concept for a collection of artworks. He had rejected it all as a diversion, something she did to occupy time while he was out dominating the world. He had never viewed it as her calling, her fervor. He had never viewed her. Not truly. The comprehension was a gradual, painful scorch. He had always viewed himself as the lead in their tale, the main character. Sophia had been a secondary role, the devoted spouse who existed to support his own path. Now observing her with Harrington, he grasped. She had been on her own path all along, one he had been too narcissistic to observe. Her tale hadn't concluded when theirs did. It had just commenced. "Michael, are we simply going to linger here?" Isabella whispered harshly, her tolerance diminishing. "This is our opportunity. David Whittaker is already approaching there. We're going to forfeit our chance." He regarded Isabella at her flawlessly adorned countenance, her sights sparkling with bare drive. She viewed Harrington and Sophia as a prospect, a ladder rung. She couldn't perceive the intricate, agonizing past that was unfolding before his very sights. To her, this was just another play in the contest. To him, it felt like the ultimate defeat. He permitted Isabella to draw him ahead, his limbs moving automatically. As they neared, he could catch fragments of their dialogue. Harrington was chuckling, a deep, authentic sound, and then she informed the director that his whole assortment was sentimentally void. Harrington was stating, his sights gleaming with entertainment as he looked at Sophia. Sophia grinned wryly. "He requested my candid view. I trust in candid views." Michael halted abruptly. That was pure Sophia, unaltered, fearless in expressing her thoughts, something he had once adored and had later attempted to repress, advising her to be more tactful. Harrington wasn't just enduring her candor. He was enchanted by it. "Michael, what are you doing?" Isabella pulled at his limb, but he was immobilized. They were only a short distance away now. He could see the fine particulars, the way a loose mahogany strand had escaped her updo, the subtle power in her palms as she grasped her wine stem, the calm certainty in her sights. She was so near, yet she felt infinitely distant. David Whittaker cut them off, his countenance a facade of compelled cheerfulness. "Victor, wonderful to see you," he resounded, extending a palm to Harrington. Harrington pivoted, his beam fading into a courteous, impartial look as he grasped David's palm. His sights flickered past David, past Isabella, and settled on Michael. For a moment there was nothing but a cool, evaluating assessment in his stare. It was the expression of a gentleman who could gauge another man's value in one glance. And then his sights returned to Sophia, and the warmth promptly reappeared. It was a clear, unspoken communication. She was the one who counted. The remainder of them were just ambient sound. The chamber ensemble commenced a fresh composition, a poignant, sorrowful tune that seemed to emphasize the calamity of Michael's epiphany. He had spent 2 years assuring himself he was improved, that he had made the correct decision. But in the path of Victor Harrington, with Sophia as the luminous center, Michael finally comprehended the reality. He hadn't triumphed. He had forfeited. He had forfeited all that ever genuinely mattered, and he hadn't even comprehended it until this very instant. He was just a chilly, isolated world, ejected into the obscurity. The atmosphere thickened with expectation. It was time for the primary attraction of the night. Victor Harrington's address and the eagerly awaited revelation of the new director of Asian Ventures. The assembly gathered around the modest raised platform at the forefront of the hall. Michael discovered himself carried along with the flow, Isabella's hand a tight clasp on his limb. He was positioned no more than 10 feet from the platform, near enough to observe the assured posture of Harrington's shoulders. near enough to see the peaceful look on Sophia's countenance as she stood beside him. She wasn't positioned in his shade, she stood alongside him, an associate. Harrington advanced to the speaker, and an instant silence descended over the space. "Good night all." His voice was composed and echoing, occupying the expansive area without strain. "Appreciate you all for attending. We're here this evening to commemorate another year of exceptional triumph for Harrington Enterprises. A triumph constructed on novelty, on unyielding determination, and most crucially on the exceptional individuals who render this firm what it is." He discussed for several minutes about periodic revenues and industry forecasts, the sort of business oration Michael had heard numerous times. But there was a distinction. Harrington spoke with a conviction and lucidity that was captivating. Michael's own associates were absorbed in his every phrase. Isabella was virtually trembling with exhilaration next to him, but Michael's sights were locked on Sophia. She was observing Harrington, not with the feigned respect of an underling, but with a serene pride, a profound and familiar fondness. "As you are aware," Harrington proceeded, his inflection changing, "we are approaching a substantial Asian growth. The guidance for this endeavor is vital. The individual who assumes this position must be not only a brilliant tactician, but a person of honor and foresight." This was it. Michael's pulse thundered against his chest. He sensed Isabella compress his limb, her own drive a tangible energy. He had invested the time. He had sealed the packs. He had participated in the contest. He was the rational selection. He was the leading contender. Harrington paused, his sights scanning the group of uplifted, hopeful countenances. "And so, it is my immense delight to declare that the new director of our Asian ventures is Elizabeth Grant." A scattering of courteous, astonished clapping erupted. Michael felt the vitality ebb from his face. Elizabeth Grant, his primary competitor, a capable, if unoriginal, option. He experienced a surge of vertigo, the ground seeming to vanish beneath him. All that effort, all that concession for naught. He heard Isabella emit a minor, irritated sigh beside him. Her hold on his limb relaxed. In that instant, he knew his worth in her sights had just declined. He was no longer the leading contender, the ascending luminary. He was just another unsuccessful manager. But the astonishment of forfeiting the advancement was nothing compared to what occurred next. Harrington beamed, allowing the clapping to subside. "My felicitations to Elizabeth. And now for a more individual declaration." He pivoted, his whole bearing softening as he regarded Sophia. He extended for her palm, intertwining his digits with hers and pulling her nearer to him. "Many of you recognize me as an entrepreneur," Harrington stated, his voice now imbued with a warmth that was strikingly authentic. "You recognize me as a gentleman who prizes reason, tactics, and outcomes. But for the past 2 years, my greatest triumph, my most cherished resource, has had nothing to do with this firm." He looked straight at Sophia, his voice lowering to a more personal pitch, though it was still broadcast throughout the hushed hall. "I've absorbed more about foresight and honor from this lady than from any commerce institution or conference room. She is a creator, a benefactor, and the most boldly truthful person I have ever encountered. She entered my life and reminded me of what it means to perceive the world not just for what it is, but for what it could become." Michael felt like he couldn't respire. The air in his lungs had solidified. He was hearing another gentleman describe the lady he had discarded, expressing all the things he had failed to perceive, all the attributes he had undervalued and attempted to suppress. Harrington continued, "We have maintained our personal life precisely that, personal. But I discover I am no longer prepared to conceal the finest portion of my life. This lady has introduced more vibrancy and significance to my world than all the triumph I have ever attained." He then shifted his gaze back to the assembly, his voice resounding with total certainty. "And I am ecstatic to declare that this autumn, Sophia Lane will become my spouse." A group exclamation swept through the space, followed by a burst of clapping, far more zealous than the one for the new director. Michael didn't perceive it. He was deafened by the thunder of his own vitality in his ears. Sophia Lane. She hadn't reclaimed his surname. She had discarded it. She had discarded him. And then it transpired. The instant that would be etched into his recollection for the remainder of his existence. As the clapping grew, Harrington bent down and kissed her. It wasn't a reserved public brush on the face. It was a kiss of deep love and closeness. A kiss that spoke of shared confidences and serene dawns, of profound link and steadfast commitment. Sophia's palm rose to cradle his face, her form blending into his, and Michael stiffened. He was no longer in the Harrington Plaza hall. He was back in their compact dwelling, the odor of solvent in the atmosphere. Sophia was displaying him a fresh artwork, her sights shining with exhilaration. He was partially attentive, his thoughts on a time limit, his digits composing a message on his device. He had murmured something dismissive, something about it being pleasant. The glow in her sights had faded. He was at their preferred eatery, the one they could scarcely afford. She was narrating a tale, chuckling, and he had interrupted her to accept a call from the workplace. He had raised a digit, quieting her joy. He was in their sleeping chamber, the separation documents on the bedside between them. She wasn't weeping. She was just regarding him with an intolerable serene melancholy. "You were never truly present, Michael," she had murmured. "You were always pursuing something else. I hope you discover it." He had discovered it. The advancement he didn't obtain. The vacant luxury apartment, the empty bond. He had pursued it all and ended up with nothing. And the lady he had abandoned, the lady he had deemed not driven enough, not fitted for his realm, was now standing in the heart of it, cherished by a gentleman who was everything Michael had ever strived to be and more. The kiss concluded, but Michael was still immobilized, a captive of his own remorse. He perceived it all with a dreadful, spirit-shattering clarity. He hadn't just forfeited a spouse. He had forfeited the finest part of himself, and he had observed passively, a willing participant in his own ruin. The stunning, shallow error on his limb meant nothing. The advancement he had just forfeited meant nothing. All that mattered was the lady in scarlet, the specter of his history, and the emblem of his enormous failure, kissing the tycoon who had acknowledged the treasure he had discarded. The clapping eventually diminished, replaced by a renewed hum of thrilled conversation. People converged on Harrington and Sophia, a whirlwind of felicitations and good wishes. Michael stayed motionless, an isle of silent terror in the festive ocean. The world was advancing around him, readjusting to this new astonishing truth, but he was trapped in the instant of the kiss. The picture scorched onto the rear of his eyelids. "Well," Isabella stated, her voice oozing with malice. "That was a total and complete squander of a $6,000 gown." Her phrases scarcely registered. He was observing Sophia. She was poised and collected amid the crowd, accepting felicitations with a serene beam. She never once glanced his way. It was as if he didn't exist. He had become unseen, a ghost at the celebration. "Did you hear me, Michael?" Isabella snapped, her claws pressing into his limb again, this time with hurtful strength. "You forfeited the advancement, everything. And to crown it all, your little old associate is marrying the damn organizer. You didn't think that was something you should have noted." He finally pivoted to regard her. The enchanting, exquisite facade had collapsed, revealing a countenance distorted with rage and bitter disillusionment. Her drive was a crude, unattractive thing, and he had just failed to nourish it. "She's my former spouse," he stated, the words feeling like fragments of crystal in his throat. Isabella's sights widened in incredulity, then narrowed into slits of pure disdain. "Your former spouse? Are you joking? You brought me here to this occasion to compete against your tycoon marrying former spouse. Did you want to embarrass me?" "No, he began. But he had no justification. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" She derided, her voice escalating. Several people nearby pivoted to look. "How could you not know? You let me stand here and chatter about her basic gown while she's betrothed to Victor freaking Harrington. You made me appear foolish." The unfairness of her charge was astounding. She was the one feeling embarrassed. An abrupt, intense fury surged through him, incinerating the shock and sorrow. It was a fury aimed at Isabella, at himself, at the whole empty pretense. "This was never about you, Isabella," he stated, his voice low and threatening. "Oh, I think it was," she retorted. This was about you displaying your new younger version in front of the old one. Except the old one got a major enhancement and left you and me behind. You're a loser, Michael. David Whittaker was correct. You don't have the right resources. Her words were intended to injure, and they did. But they also freed him. He regarded this lady, this perfect adornment he had selected, and felt nothing but a profound, chilling vacancy. Their whole bond was a transaction, and the conditions of the agreement had just been irreversibly violated. We're finished, he stated, the resolution firming in his mind with absolute surety. Isabella laughed, a rough, unattractive sound. You're ending it with me. You think you're in a position to end it with anyone? You just forfeited everything? No, Michael said, a strange sense of tranquility settling over him. I forfeited everything 2 years ago. I just didn't comprehend it until tonight. He pivoted and walked away from her, leaving her standing there, her mouth open in rage. He didn't care about the spectacle she might create. He didn't care about what his associates would murmur tomorrow. None of it mattered. He forced his way through the assembly, his movements frantic, desperate. He didn't know where he was heading, only that he had to escape to flee the stifling environment of the hall, to flee the image of his own failure in 1,000 reflections. He discovered a lateral entrance that led to an abandoned maintenance hallway. He stumbled through it, the abrupt silence a stark contrast to the noise of the banquet. The hallway was faintly illuminated, lined with conduits and wiring systems. It was the unadorned interior of the splendid structure. He rested against the cool cement wall, his custom attire feeling utterly absurd in this stark utilitarian space. He closed his eyes and finally released the breath he had been holding. He had spent 2 years fleeing from the specter of his marriage, burying his remorse under layers of labor, wealth, and meaningless fondness. Tonight that specter had appeared in a scarlet gown and methodically dismantled his entire life. He thought of Sophia. He tried to reconcile the lady he had wed with the lady who was about to wed Victor Harrington. Had the fortitude, the assurance, the poise been there all along, concealed beneath the surface, awaiting the liberty to emerge? Had he not just failed to see it, but actively suppressed it with his own vanity and drive? A soft snap resonated down the hallway. Michael opened his eyes and saw a figure standing at the distant end, outlined against the light from the hall. His heart jumped into his throat. It was her. Sophia walked slowly toward him, her scarlet gown a streak of color in the dull hallway. Her expression was indecipherable. She stopped a few feet away, the space between them charged with unspoken past. I saw you depart, she said, her voice quiet, calm. It was the voice he remembered from late-night talks and whispered confidences, but it held a new depth, a new strength. Sophia, he breathed her name, the first time he had uttered it aloud in 2 years. It felt both strange and painfully familiar. I didn't know you would be here, she stated, not as a reproach, but as a simple truth. I work here, he said, the words sounding pitiful in his own ears. I was a manager. She nodded gradually, her gaze analytical, as if she was examining a work of art, trying to understand its makeup. You look weary, Michael. Her simple remark undid him more than Isabella's spite ever could. She wasn't angry. She wasn't boasting. She was just seeing him. Truly seeing him. Perhaps for the first time tonight. I heard the declaration, he said, his voice breaking. Felicitations. Thank you, she said, her expression softening a bit. Victor is a good man. He sees me. The simple, powerful truth of that statement was a blade to his heart. He sees me. The 3 words articulated everything Michael had failed to do. He had looked at her, but he hadn't seen her. He had lived with her, but he hadn't known her. He asked the question, a raw, desperate plea. How did this happen? You and him. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the old Sophia, a trace of the pain he had caused. After I left you, she began, her voice steady. I was adrift for a while. I had lost myself in you, in our life. I had to discover who I was without you. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I immersed myself in my creativity. I created with an anger and a grief I had never known. And then one day the anger was gone, and the grief was gone, and there was just me. I started displaying my work in modest exhibitions. One of those exhibitions was backed by a charitable foundation. Victor heads that foundation. He purchased one of my artworks. Then he visited my workshop to view more. We conversed for hours about creativity, about existence, about what it means to construct something meaningful. He didn't see my creativity as a pastime. He saw it as my essence. The tale was so straightforward, so natural. It was a tale of connection, of being seen and valued for who you truly are. It was the tale he and Sophia should have had. "I'm sorry, Soph," he whispered, using the old endearing name without thinking. The word lingered in the air between them, a remnant of a forgotten dialect. "For everything. I was an idiot." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with an ancient sorrow. "You were. But I'm not that lady anymore, Michael. The lady you were an idiot to is gone. You didn't shatter her. You set her free." She pivoted to depart. Her role in this chapter of his life finally truly concluded. She was walking back to her new existence, to the gentleman who saw her, leaving Michael alone in the maintenance hallway, in the ruins of the life he had chosen. The walk from the maintenance hallway back into the hall was the longest of Michael's life. Each step was a confrontation. The glittering images in the mirrors no longer showed a successful manager. They showed a vacant man, a specter haunting the scene of his own downfall. He saw his associates, who now cast him sympathetic or mocking glances. The news of his public failure, losing the advancement and being abruptly abandoned by his prize partner in the same night, would already be circulating. He was a warning story in progress, but the social embarrassment was a dull pain compared to the sharp, searing ache of his conversation with Sophia. Her words echoed in his mind. "You didn't shatter her. You set her free." She had absolved him of a wrongdoing he hadn't realized he was committing. He had thought his betrayal was the infidelity, the disputes, the neglect. But the true wrongdoing was so much deeper. He had tried to confine her light, to adapt her vibrant creative soul to fit his dull business ambitions. Her freedom hadn't just been from him, but from the confinement he had unknowingly built around her. He needed to speak to her one more time. Not to regain her. He knew with a soul-deep certainty that opportunity had passed, traversed a sea, and arrived in a territory he could never access. He needed to do it for himself. He needed one final act of candor to begin the long, difficult process of finding the man he had lost so many years ago. He saw her near the grand entryway, standing with Victor Harrington. They were preparing to leave. Harrington had his palm on her back, a quiet, guarding gesture. He was chuckling at something she had said, his face alive with genuine joy. The sight was another twist of the blade. Yet Michael found himself feeling a strange, detached sense of peace. She was content. She was secure. She was cherished. And in the end, wasn't that what he should have wanted for her all along? As he approached, Victor Harrington's eyes met his. The warmth in them instantly vanished, replaced by a cool, unrelenting steel. It was the look of a man protecting what was most precious to him. "Michael," Sophia said, her voice neutral, though he could see a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Mr. Harrington," Michael began, his voice. He extended a hand. "I just wanted to say felicitations to both of you." Harrington looked at Michael's outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip was firm, his gaze unwavering. "Thank you," he said, the words polite but icy. "Sophia." Michael pivoted to her, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Can I have 1 minute, please?" Sophia looked at Harrington, a silent question passing between them. Harrington gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes never leaving Michael. He trusted her. The depth of that trust was another revelation. Harrington stepped back, giving them a small pocket of privacy amid the departing guests. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Michael said quickly, the words tumbling out. I need to say this. I need you to know that I see it now. Everything." He took a shaky breath. "I remember when we first met. You were sketching in the park and you had this light inside you. You saw the world in a way I couldn't understand, but I was drawn to it. I loved it. And somewhere along the way, I became afraid of it. Your light made my own ambitions feel small and gray. So, I tried to dim it. I told you to be more practical, to be more diplomatic. I dismissed your creativity. I tried to make you a reflection of my world instead of celebrating the beautiful, brilliant world you had inside you. He could see tears welling in Sophia's eyes, and he felt his own throat tighten. The infidelity, that was just a symptom of a much deeper illness. I was losing myself, and instead of fighting for us, I took the coward's way out. I blamed you for not understanding the pressure I was under, when in reality, I was the one who didn't understand what true strength and value were. You were holding the real treasure, and I traded it all away for a pile of fool's gold. He finally ran out of words, the confession leaving him feeling raw and exposed, but also lighter than he had felt in years. He had finally spoken the truth, the ugly, painful, and necessary truth. Sophia was silent for a long moment, the tears now tracing silent paths down her cheeks. I loved that man in the park, Michael, she said, her voice soft but clear. The one who was still dreaming. The one who hadn't yet decided that my dreams were less important than his. I held on for him for a long time. I kept hoping he would come back, but he never did. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let him die. She reached out and for a fleeting moment laid her hand on his arm. Her touch was not one of romantic affection, but of a sad, compassionate closure. It was a gesture of forgiveness. That man isn't dead, Michael, she said. He's just lost. I hope for your sake you find him again. Goodbye. She pivoted and walked back to Victor, who wrapped his arm around her protectively. He gave Michael one last long look, a look that was no longer hostile, but held a sliver of something akin to understanding, perhaps even pity. Then they pivoted and walked out of the hall, leaving Michael alone with his confrontation. He had come to the banquet to solidify his victory, to claim his prize. He was leaving with something far more valuable, a brutal, unflinching understanding of himself. He had lost the advancement, the partner, and any lingering hope of reconciliation with the love of his life. He had, by all conventional measures, lost everything. But as he stood there amid the ruins of his carefully constructed life, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't happiness or even hope. It was a possibility. The possibility of starting over, the possibility of finding that man who was lost. The confrontation was over. The long road to redemption was just beginning. The days that followed the banquet were a haze of quiet dismantling. Michael walked into David Whitaker's office the next morning and resigned. The letter of resignation already prepared and signed. David was surprised but not shocked. In the ruthless world of Harrington Enterprises, a public failure of that scale was a professional death sentence. Anyway, Michael's resignation was just a proactive move. Any plans? David asked, his professional curiosity piqued. I'm going to find something I lost, Michael replied. The enigmatic answer feeling more honest than any discussion of new positions or business ventures. He then went home to the barren luxury apartment and systematically packed Isabella's belongings into costly luggage. She had already departed, leaving behind only a faint, overpowering scent of her perfume and a few angry messages. He left the luggage with the concierge and felt a profound sense of relief as the door to the apartment clicked shut, sealing off that chapter of his life. Living in the luxury apartment felt like living in a tomb, a monument to a life he no longer desired. He terminated the lease, accepting a substantial financial loss, and rented a small, simple apartment in a neighborhood of the city he and Sophia used to adore, an area with aged stone buildings, independent bookshops, and art exhibitions. The apartment was minimal with pale walls and timber floors that echoed with every step. For the first time in years, there was silence, no business terminology, no superficial talk, no buzz of ambition. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and empty canvas. He didn't know what to do with himself. He had spent his entire adult life climbing a ladder, and now he was standing on the ground with no idea which direction to walk. For weeks, he did nothing but wander the city streets, observing. He watched street performers play for loose change. He saw creators drawing in the park. He saw pairs laughing in cafes. He was seeing the world through new eyes, noticing the small, beautiful details he had been blind to for so long. He was seeing the world the way Sophia used to see it. One afternoon his explorations took him past a small, modest creativity supply shop. On impulse, he entered. The air smelled of solvent, oil, and possibility. It was the smell of his old apartment, the smell of Sophia. He walked the aisles, his fingers tracing the rough textures of fabric, the smooth wood of tools. He had no idea what he was doing, but he purchased a small beginner kit, a few fabrics, some colors, and a set of tools. Back in his empty apartment, he set up the stand in the center of the living area, the afternoon sun streaming through the large window. He stared at the blank pale fabric for what felt like hours. It was the most intimidating thing he had ever faced. More intimidating than any conference room, any hostile discussion, any leader. It was a perfect unmarred void, and he was terrified of marking it with his own inadequacy. He thought of Sophia's words. That man isn't dead. He's just lost. Who was that man? What did he care about? What did he want to say? Michael didn't have the answers, so he decided to depict what he felt. He squeezed a portion of dark, turbulent gray color onto the board. Then he added a deep, sorrowful blue. He blended them together, the hue of remorse. His first stroke was tentative, awkward. He had no method, no instruction. He just moved the tool across the fabric, letting the emotions flow out of him and into the hue. He depicted the stifling darkness of his drive, the sharp, jagged lines of his broken bonds, the hollow vacancy of his triumph. He depicted for hours, losing all sense of time. He was covered in color, his hands, his face, his clothes. The sun descended, and the room grew dark. But he kept depicting, fueled by a frantic, desperate energy. When he finally stepped back, exhausted and depleted, he looked at what he had created. It was a disorder, a chaotic, ugly, abstract burst of dark hues. It was a portrait of his own fractured essence, and it was the most honest thing he had done in a decade. In the center of the dark, chaotic disorder, he saw a small patch of fabric he had missed, a tiny, untouched speck of pale. It was a flaw in his depiction of despair. But as he looked at it, it didn't feel like an error. It felt like a possibility, a glimmer of light in the darkness. He picked up a new tool, and with a trembling hand, he dipped it into the brightest, most vibrant yellow he had. He touched the tool to that tiny speck of pale, leaving a single brilliant dot of hue in the heart of the storm. It wasn't a masterpiece. It wasn't even a good depiction. But it was a start. It was the first stroke on the new canvas of his life. He didn't know what the final image would look like. He didn't know if he would ever find happiness or redemption. But as he stood there in his quiet, empty apartment, looking at that single dot of yellow, he felt a flicker of something he had thought was lost forever. A small, tentative spark of hope. He was finally depicting his own world, and for the first time he was seeing it in full color. So what do you think? If you were in Michael's shoes watching the love of your life kiss another man after you threw it all away, what would you have done? Would you have fought for her, walked away in silence, or done something else entirely? Let us know in the comments below.